Because I knew I was watching. It's going to chest. Just running. It's running. Now, are you want to say? I have no way to explain that. But anyway, I was. You know what you did. You know, I'm going to one is here's how I feel in my house. I took those guys very important. On the middle of the yeah, I'm pretty good. And then like, and then there was something that did was for Taylor. Where else? Correct me what you're doing. I work. Yeah.
All right, well, let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go and get started. Um, we are in Matthew 25. If you want to turn your Bibles over there, we're going to continue on and finish up this section. And I don't know. I suspect that we'll probably end up spending the whole time talking about this parable. But we've been talking specifically in this section about parables of, if you want to call it accountability or preparedness, or being. I may in a second. Um, just being ready for the judgment of Christ, and particularly in the context of being given a stewardship, being given a responsibility, and then being held accountable for how you use that or how you act during that time. If you remember, we talked about Matthew 24, the signs of the coming of, of the destruction of Jerusalem, and the apostles who are going to be there, and their focus on how will we know when this is going to happen. And what we see in this again is, if we look at this from a high up vantage point, is not so much about figuring out when all this is going to happen, but what are we do? What are you doing during that time? Are you worried about trying to figure out when the day of the Lord is going to come, or are you worried about doing the work that God has given you to do during that time? And the lessons specifically to the apostles here are given in that vein. But as we talked about, the idea of being prepared and being vigilant and being sober minded is something that the apostle Paul repeats, that Peter and John all talk about, the idea of living in a way that is with the mind that at some point the Lord is going to come. And that we have been given responsibility and stewardship. And the question is going to be, what have we done with what God has given us during that time, whatever that context may be? And so that obviously is a big part of what we're talking about in Matthew 25 here with the parable of the talents, beginning in verse 14. And so let's look at that real quickly, and then we'll make some observations. In beginning of verse 14, we read, "It will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. And then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them. He made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joys of your master." I think I do that. Thank you. And he also said, also he who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward and said, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you gathered no seed, or gathered where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reaped where I had not sown and gathered where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers. And at my coming, I should have received what was mine with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will be more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. Cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing teeth. And so, as I'm thinking about this, what is the underlying, if you had to come up with one underlying fact, reality of this story that everything else depends on, what is the most important aspect of this story that really kind of sets the foundation for everything else? That's kind of a big question, I know, but I'll leave it open to see what we say.
When you use what you have,
Okay,
God's perfect.
you use what you have, and that's getting kind of to my point, because if you take that a step farther back, what is that? What's that conclusion founded on? What principle? You use what you have. Well, why do I need to use what I have to serve God? Why? Because God gave it to you, right? And along with that, not only did God give it to you, but God gave it to you with an expectation that it be used. Well, I can almost hear somebody saying, well, look, God gave me this thing, but that doesn't mean I have to do what He wants with it." Well, why is that true? Why is it that I have an obligation now that God has given something to me that I must now use it in the way that God has instructed me to use it? What does this all get down to? Larry.
Oh, so as a Christians, if we're going to follow the example of Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
you see him coming down and doing real.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm finding of what's the term when the trees,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the tree that bear bad fruit, and the further tree, the tree that doesn't bear any fruit. And in this passage here, I see almost totally one. That I think the emphasis is the emphasizing like with the virgins that didn't use their talents.
Mm-hmm.
Or the I'm sorry, the virgins that didn't turn their lamp.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
The man that didn't use his talents.
Yeah.
In the later part of the chapter, you've got all those people that didn't go this and sit, didn't do this and didn't do that.
Yeah.
And as children of God, we're supposed to be working, exhibiting works
Mhm.
according to with our faith.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't. Right.
Well, it is in a way, yeah, because basically the premise of all this is that there is a relationship between a master and a servant, and there is a right for the master to expect that the servant do what the master has said, and there is an obligation for the servant to do what the master has said. Otherwise, you know, all of this is kind of meaningless, right? Unless there's an obligation here to begin with. If I have no obligation to do any of this stuff, then what does it matter? Hey, he gave me 5 talents. I'll go do whatever I want to do with it. That's great. Except we don't have the right to do that. And I don't have the right to stand before my master and say, well, master, you gave me 5 talents. That's really the fact that I went and used it however I wanted to. That's kind of on you, isn't it? Because you didn't tell me what to do. You just said, here's 5 talents. Take care of it until I come back. I could have done whatever I wanted. Except when I understand that my job or my role in this story is a steward, there's an implication there, right? When the master gives me this money and says, I'm going to be gone, take care of it until I come back, there's a pretty strong implication that God does not expect me just to squander that. I mean, that's a pretty obvious statement, but it's true. And He doesn't give these things so that I can go use them however I want to use them according to what I think is best for my own personal benefit. The idea is, first and foremost, as a steward of God, as a steward of what has been given to you, you're going to be accountable for how you use it. And did you use it for yourself or did you use it for God? And I think that's one of the things that comes out here, the idea that we've got two men that not only use their talents, their 5 talents, their 2 talents, but they seem kind of excited. Maybe I'm just reading something into it, but you get the impression of the 5 talent man coming forward saying, look, Lord, look what I've done. Look, you gave me 5, I've got 5 more. Why is he's expecting that this is something that his master will be pleased with, and he is pleased with him. In fact, the master's response, you've been faithful over little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joys of your master. By the way, just throw it out there. A talent, we talked about this before, talent is a large sum of money, right? 20 years wages. And how does the master describe it? You've been faithful over a little. 5 talents, 20 years, 100 years of labor. And the master says, you've been faithful over a little. What does that tell us about what's awaiting for this? What first of all, what does it tell us about the resources of the master? And second of all, the generosity of what he is now about to do for this man. Uh, I mean, it's easy to just breeze past that, but that the master considers what he's given you really not very much. So that being the case, do I come to the master and say, "Look, Lord, look how great I am. I got 5 talents for you." And the master's response is, "Good. That's a little thing, but I'm pleased with the fact that you've done this." Where's is there room for boasting there? No, this is not a servant who is boasting about it, but he is a servant who is excited about doing what the master has called him to do. The master didn't call him to make 100 talents with 5 talents. In fact, he didn't even tell him how much he expected at all. He just said, "Here, take this, use it." And so when we think about the dynamics and the attitude there, is there a sense in which there's kind of some grace going on here? I'm not going to tell you what to do with this. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not even going to tell you what I expect of it because you know. And if you're a servant who's devoted to service to your master, and I want to do the best for him, and my goal is to please him, I'm going to go find the very best way to do that I can and get the most return out of what he has given me so that when he comes back, did he say I needed to have 5 talents? No. But I'm going to do my best to get as much out of that as I can. Okay, Laura, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, and I guess inherent in that, in this whole vignette is that there must have been some kind of expectation.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we would work so hard.
Yeah.
And there's also something to be said for the equity.
Mhm.
The same statement is given to both,
Yeah.
regardless of the amount.
Yeah. And in fact, he says, each according to his ability. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's an important point too. Go ahead, Larry.
What also makes it God accountable for something that we're not able to do. If someone is wealthy
Mhm.
and they have, use their wealth and what, I mean, I'll go like that.
Yeah.
So God will meet the same
Yeah.
standard, I guess. I don't know if that's the right
Yeah.
descriptor to use.
Well, and I would say this, and I think I see where you're going with it, because maybe standard is the best way to use it, because it's not so much a standard of how much I accomplish. Where is the standard lie with those servants? It's kind of in the heart, isn't it? It's in the attitude, right? And I think that's an implication here. Like you say, it's if there were a standard that would mean that I have to achieve some sort of a benchmark. Well, what happens when I achieve a benchmark? If I tell you, all right, I want you to gain. All right, I'm going to give you 2 talents. I want 2 talents back. And I come back and say, here you go, master, 2 talents, just like you asked. Who is there motivation for me to do more than 2? I hit my quota. I can go on vacation now, right? Because that's all God asked of me. Except the master didn't ask for 2 talents. And to your point, there's an implication here. And it goes back to the idea of how do I view the master? If I view the master as one that I want to please and I want to serve and I want to do good for, I'm not thinking so much about, well, I need to meet the expectation as I'm going to do as much as I can. And then we contrast that with the 1 talent man and his response. And of course, this is really the focus of the parable there at all. Because he responds and says, first of all, master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. I mean, first of all, how does he view the master? What's his opinion of the master?
Not generous or kind.
No, not generous. This is not, you got the 2 other servants who are excited about bringing what they've given. They're not sitting here, man, is it going to be enough? I don't know. He's a hard master. He probably wants 10 instead of 5. He's not going to be happy with this. It's not going to be sufficient for what it's just, and it seems like at least it's kind of the attitude, the idea that whatever I bring you, it's not going to be enough anyway. I've only got 1 talent. you only gave me. It's not said. Of course, you can read into the idea. I always say you got to be careful not to read too much into some of the parables. But I think there's some obvious ideas that if I've been given one talent, this guy's been given two, and he's been given five. What am I thinking here? In fact, didn't the master say each according to his ability? So you're saying I'm not as good as them. I only got one. So there's already you could imagine some of the things that are floating through this person's mind. And to top it all off, he doesn't believe that his master is just. You're a hard man. You reap where you do not sow, gathering where you scatter no seed. Now, let's take that and apply that to God as the master or Christ as the master. Is there a sense, even if it's an inaccurate sense, is there a sense in which this is a true statement? In a sense, I mean, from a certain point of view, you're asking me to go do this work. You're not. You didn't do this work. God expects me to go labor in the vineyard. He's not laboring in the vineyard. He's not doing the work. He expects me to go do the work while he waits and judges me according to what I have done. Now, what happens in the gospel that destroys this argument? What did Jesus come to do? Did Jesus labor in the vineyard? Jesus labored in the vineyard. Did Jesus give to the master? Jesus gave everything to the master. Gave everything. Yeah. So it's one of those things where on a superficial, if I had no real understanding or appreciation for the master, I could look at God, for example, and say, well, God just, he puts us on this world. He doesn't fix crime. He doesn't fix evil. He makes my life hard. He allows it to be hard. And he expects me to go do all this stuff. And why would he do that? And the missing component is that what we see in the Gospels is God never asking or commanding anyone to do something that he did not do through the Christ who came and lived in this earth. I'm getting into my lesson a little bit, but that's the idea. It's first of all, it's this idea that you didn't you didn't do any you didn't do any sowing, you didn't prepare anything. You remember what Jesus told the apostles? He said already the seed has been sown and you're now reaping what has been done. In other words, there's been a lot of work that happened before you, and now you're just coming in and finishing this off. Who's been working before you? Well, God's been working through the prophets, through John the Baptist, preparing the way, working his will throughout creation and throughout the history of the world to bring everything to this point. It's almost as if to say that God didn't do anything uh, up to this point in history is kind of like saying, well, we just arrived at this point by chance. And not that God has been the one preparing the vineyard and cultivating the seed and sending the blessings and allowing all these things to happen. And the idea that you reap where you didn't sow. Who gets credit for in the one talent man's mind? Who's getting credit for everything that's getting done? The workers. I did all this. I reaped. Did you really? Well, what does Paul say about that? You remember? I planted, Apollos watered, but who gave the increase? God did. There's an arrogance level here already that starts off in this attitude that says that I'm the one that's responsible for doing all of this. And when I believe that, and when I say, you know what, whatever I'm going to accomplish in my life for God it's going to be based on how much I'm able to accomplish, how much I'm able to produce. What's going to happen at that point? Yeah, all of a sudden I start thinking about all the things that I could do and haven't done and can't do and are beyond my ability. And all of a sudden I started thinking to myself, what exactly is it possible that I could do that would please God? And what do? I said, well, it's not going to work. I can't do anything. So what's the point? I'll just kind of maintain and do whatever I do, and I'll just live my life, and that's just going to have to be enough. And sadly, that is the prevailing view of the vast majority of people in the world that claim to choose to serve God. We just kind of live our lives. We do what we do, and we expect that God will be satisfied with whatever happens to fall His way. Larry and then Laura.
Well, and then, we keep on looking at it.
Mhm.
You know, you see the map called the wicked.
Mhm.
You think someone might be, in the Old Testament about covenant first you want to be passionate fire,
Mm.
but when people sin, well, he's not, he's didn't do any of that. They didn't do anything. Yet the still called wicked.
Yeah.
And so it's just put on the same plane to be indifferent and be completely apathetic to what you've been given.
Mhm.
And then you took that talent and found and actively did evil with
Yeah.
it. If you just passive, it's the same in the eyes of God.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to the definition of what's good and what's evil. We think about that from the standpoint of, I always say Disney loves to make, we live in a Disneyfied culture where evil is the guy in the handlebar mustache that ties the girl to the railroad tracks and laughs wickedly as he runs away. And good is the person that comes and unties her and saves her. It's that idea of this idea of malevolent actions that are evil and benevolent actions are good. But the Bible defines good and evil differently than that. It's not to say that those malevolent actions are not evil. They are. But evil and good are determined by, did I do God's will? Did I serve God or did I serve man? And to your point, yeah, I can go do all kinds of good things in this world, but that's not what I'm being judged on. It's, did you follow Christ? Did you do God's will? Did you devote your life to Him? Did you love the Lord your God with all your heart? Because if you haven't done that, all the good works in the world don't change the fact that I didn't do what God called me to do. Clark. Mhm.
Going back to when we mentioned the Apostle Paul, you know, we, from a historical standpoint, we look at Paul as such a wonderful worker. He did so much, but he, in his inspired wisdom, simply viewed himself as a fellow laborer who doesn't plant seeds. How about that for a contrast?
Yep.
You know? If we judge each other by our human eyes, I'm going to judge somebody, oh, I don't know, I'll throw out a name, like David Tant. Is such a fabulous worker. Again, say that he's nothing but a sower, but a worker. And then in your example about tying the girl to the railroad tracks, is the person who passes by the railroad tracks and sees her tied up and does nothing any different than the one who tied her up.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I've done nothing to save her.
Yeah.
So inactivity, like the zero like the one talent man, he's called wicked.
Yeah.
So the person who passed by would be wicked too.
Yeah, and I think there's something interesting about these three. Let's go with that a little bit, because you got the man who says, "I knew you to be a hard man, so I was afraid." Do you think is that an accurate statement? Do you think he was afraid? I mean, I think he probably was. I don't think there's any thing wrong with that. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In Revelation 21, that's listed. You can say liars and murderers. So
Right. And I think that's kind of to the point I'm going to make here is that when we think about, okay, I characterize myself as fearful. I don't think that what I do is going to be good enough. Frankly, you're not going to be happy with it anyway. I'm going to get in trouble regardless. So I'm just going to go and do this, the minimal. And I haven't done anything like, to your point, I haven't done anything like overtly wrong. I didn't steal from you. I didn't, like the unjust steward earlier. I didn't squander your earnings. Because in my view, not using means I'm not squandering. But in God's view, what does He say? Well, no, that is because they're given to you to be used. It's kind of like I'm going to hit the third rail of Christian politics and talk about the fact that we gathered together a $200,000 savings account with our collection and it's sitting in the bank. Well, what are we going to do with it? Well, if we use it, we won't have it. Well, if we spend it, what if we mess something up? What if we run out? What if we, it's, we don't collect funds for the saints so they can sit there and gather interest. Yeah. 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 If that money never does anything, have I squandered it? Yes, because it's not there to be collected. And by the same token, I think one of the messages here is that what God has given us is not meant to just sit there and do nothing. If it sits there and does nothing, or if I bury it in the ground, which is a pretty appropriate way to look at it, if I just bury my talent in the ground and never let anybody benefit from it, then I've wasted it and I squandered it, and it's worse in many ways. than what we talked about. So there's this idea, and so I want to go back. I got distracted. The idea of being afraid, but the master describes him with two other phrases, doesn't he? What does he say? Wicked and slothful, or lazy. Let's just call it lazy.
The phrase afraid
Mhm.
as an excuse.
Yeah,
They're not really afraid, they just don't want to do it.
yeah,
Fearful sounds like a better excuse than lazy.
yeah. And I do think there's a relation to that, and I can relate to this very strongly as someone who is very definitely a procrastinator. I saw something online the other day that I thought, or a while back, that I thought made a lot of sense. It said procrastinators are not. Procrastination is not about laziness. Procrastination is about uncertainty or fear or I just I what happens if I mess this up? I get to the end, it's not very good, and so you just kind of look. I'll deal with it. Here's the thing that I know I can get done. I'll do that. This thing I'm not sure about. I'll just let that go a little bit because I'm not real sure how well I'm going to do with it. There's a sense in which there's some truth to that. Fear of whether the outcome eventually is going to be worth it or not, and so it's easier just to go do this thing over here. And there is an element of fear, but let's be honest. To your point, there's also an element of laziness because this is going to be hard, and there's risk involved in this. And I'm going to have to, I'm going to have to really put some extra things into this, and I'm just not sure if I'm up for that challenge, and so I just don't do it, or I'll do it later. I just kind of put it off a little bit. And so there's a real relationship, I think, between that idea of being fearful, but also being unwilling to apply myself to a task. And yeah, I'd call that fearful all I want, but the Lord calls it lazy. To your point, go ahead.
Well, it's not mentioned here, but what was Moses and God's admonition to Joshua and
Hmm.
nation?
Yeah,
Strong, courageous.
yeah,
Courage, feeling that fear, but having the wherewithal, fortitude,
hmm,
the ability to move forward.
yeah.
Every soldier in history was fearful like we are
Mhm.
because something might happen, then no one would ever
Yeah.
know.
If you notice, if you were still doing the Bible reading and you've gone through Joshua and you're into Judges, but if you notice Joshua, what about 2/3 of the way through the book, you're reading about all this conquest that, man, they're really doing well. They're getting a lot done. And then you get there, and all of a sudden, Joshua has to call the people together and say, "What are you people doing? These five have got their inheritance, and you seven have done nothing. Half the land of Canaan is unoccupied. What are you waiting for? Go do it." And it's that idea, kind of to your point, that it's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of work. And at the end of the day, do I believe that we're going to win? I think we probably are, but maybe I'm not ready to make that my priority. And so there's a sense in which, yeah, you need to be galvanized to act on what you know to be true. And so it's this idea of wicked. In other words, you rebelled. You didn't do what I told you to do. You're slothful. You're lazy. You used my reputation and how you viewed me as an excuse. And in fact, he makes the point it's not an excuse because if you really believe that, and let's apply that to the example I used earlier. Let's say that no matter what I do, I can't live good enough for God. No matter what I do, it's just not going to be enough. So what's the point? I'm just going to live my life because God is a hard taskmaster and he expects too much of me. Can you imagine the response of Christ saying, if you really believed that, wouldn't you have at least done the bare minimum? Wouldn't you have at least tried? The only reason you didn't try is because you didn't think that it would be worth the effort. It's not about fear. It's about you not really believing that there's a consequence to not having done anything. And that's kind of what he says here. At least he says, if you really believed that, you would have at least put my money in the bank. I would have at least gotten something out of it because something is better than nothing. Which, by the way, I don't know if that's a strong point that I would make out of this, but it's certainly true. And maybe in my eyes, does do we ever get any indication here that if the master had said, okay, what'd you do with your one talent? Well, I put it in the bank. Here's your interest. How would the master have felt about that? We don't know, but I know it would have been better than this. It would have at least have been said, okay, fine. At least you did something. Now, again, you could argue about whether that would have been acceptable or not. But the reality is, he says, this is why I'm saying this not about being fearful, because if you were really fearful, this is what you would have done. In reality, what won out was your unwillingness to do the work that needed to be done. And so he cast him out. And so when we think about this, and thinking about, um, I think Larry kind of already alluded to this. Does this passage teach works-based salvation? It would be very easy to say, well, see, there you go. God is expecting that me to produce a certain amount because He's given me a certain amount, and therefore I've somehow earned something. But again, I think we can understand this is a great example of how works and faith work together. The idea that I've been given a stewardship. I go do whatever I can do, and I use the talents that have been available with the assumption that if I use those talents that God has given me, and again, I'm saying talents in this context, that they will produce something. Not because I was so skilled at it, because skill level doesn't matter. In this context, you got 2 talents and 5 talents. Which one did God esteem more? Didn't matter. What mattered was you use what you've been given. He used what he's been given, and the production that came out of that was pleasing to God. Larry, go ahead.
I ordered draw a parallel from the cross.
Hmm.
What you
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
all you can do
yeah,
find out and what man that was worth.
yeah,
It's hard. And then he puts you out in this guy, it's obviously got years ahead
yeah.
or something, and then he does nothing. That's not going to fly because
Yeah.
we have work to do if we're able to do it.
Yeah, I always make the point of that. Do you really believe that thief could have come down from that cross? He would have refused to have been baptized. I mean, are we really going to make that argument? It doesn't make sense. To your point, he was in that situation. I always said, the point of the thief on the cross is that Christ can save anybody however he wants. Full stop, period. Well, that's great. That means I don't have to do it. No, because what's he asked you to do? He's told you to be baptized into Christ for the remission of your sins. And I don't get to say, well, wait a second. That 1 talent guy over there, you didn't make him do anything. You just told him to give 1 talent back. So why are you expecting me to do more than what this person was expecting? There's that other idea, the idea that I'm somehow going to compare myself to somebody else and assume that what I did with my talent or my ability or my blessings is going to be sufficient because at least I'm doing as much as that person. Go back to David Tant. I guarantee you that one of the responses that David Tant would make, look at all the good you've done. Look at what you have accomplished in your life. And his answer was, yeah, but look at what God gave me to do. Look at the opportunities that I had that this person over here doesn't have. Look at the abilities that God has given me that this other person can't do the way that he ought to do. How much more does God expect of me? Can I sit here and say because I did more, you know, I I'm the last person that ought to be staying up here bragging about how much I study the Bible because God has given me the blessing and the honor of worship of working in His kingdom and studying and working and as Paul said, woe be it to me if I'm not doing those things. I don't get to use that as a barometer to say, well, I'm doing a lot better than they are. The question is, what have you been called to do? Last point, and then we'll end it because I know we're out of time. I said something last week, and I'm going to walk it back. I said that we talk about this parable, and a lot of times we make a distinction. And I've heard some people on the one hand will say this is about talents, this is about abilities, and on the other hand will say, well, the word talent is obviously a monetary term. It has nothing to do with talent or ability or anything. And I said at the end of the day, it doesn't really make a lot of difference whether we make that distinction or not. I'm going to walk that back a little bit because if I do say that this parable is concerning talent and ability, what becomes my response when the question is, what have you done for the Lord? How have you served the local church? Well, God hasn't given me that ability. God, I can't teach. I can't lead singing. I'm not able to do those things. And therefore, God does not expect those things from me. And therefore, I don't have to worry about that. And I think we have developed a culture in the church that allows me to sit there and say that if I don't have any perceived talent in an area, then I'm not going to be responsible for doing anything. When we talk about this parable, he's not talking about ability. He's talking about blessings. He's talking about the fact that if God has given you, when Paul talks about the collection for the saints, how are they to give on the first day of every week? According to what? According to what they purposed in heart, according to what God has blessed them with, right? According to how God has blessed them. In other words, now if we take this and apply it to the parable of the talents, are my talents just about my abilities? It's about my opportunity. It's about my resources. It's about my time. Every day in my life, if every day in my life is truly a gift of God, and I really believe that, how did I use my day? How did I use what God has given me? Have I done something to bless the church this week, this month? Have I done something to bless my brethren this week or this month, this year? What have I done? And if I then said, well, I did this one thing, checked it off. I'm a one talent person. I'm done. Or if I ask myself, how much more can I do? How can I be a blessing in God's kingdom? How can I use what God has given me to serve his people? Anyway, we're out of time. I got to stop there. So I appreciate, thank you for your patience. We'll take a break and we'll start up our worship soon. Y'all doing all right? Oh,